the historical growth of bilingual education in the U.S. Beginning with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Civil Rights Act banned discrimination based on race, sex, and national origin in public facilities. Just 2 years after Brown v. Board of Education established racial segregation as unconstitutional, this act is a huge start to equal education for all American students, not just the average or mainstream individuals. It is also significant as it ignited change, support for English language learners, and a different perception of ethnic minorities. Title VII allowed state funding for students whose first language wasn't English, stimulating a positive bilingual legislation. Moving through to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, we see that education for language minority students began to improve during the Civil Rights Movement, and the ESEA increases the funds from the federal government and improved policies and procedures for students of low-income families. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968. This act provided grants to school districts and other entities. It was a great step for focus and support for bilingual education. However, these grants had to be earned through a competitive process and through funded programs only, limiting the accessibility students around the nation have to not only the sources or awareness of bilingual education, but the financial funding to fund the programs as well. Moving on to Lau versus Nichols in 1974. This is one of the most important court decisions involving the English language learners' education. The district argued that all language minorities were receiving treatment equal to that of other students. In this case, the Chinese American students in San Francisco, California. However, Justice William Douglas argues that providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum only forecloses students who don't understand English to form a meaningful education. This was still a huge turning point for accountability in both the delivering of quality education and instruction to diverse groups of students. This led to the Lau remedies of 1975. These remedies were so important from the case before that they were codified into federal law as the Educational Opportunities Act, or the EOA, of 1974. This act was declaring that educational agencies take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede students' participation in academic success. This was important for them to know at the time, as both parents and the education leaders, teachers, administration, as well as the government learned that there is responsibility on education facilities, and it was unfair to expect all students to learn at the same rate with the same materials, etc. So yes, let's see what's next. What's important to note here is that there was a huge break in progress in between 1974 up until about 2002. There went about 20 years of slow progress and process made for bilingual education programs as well as English language learners. This Sheltered English Immersion is kind of the first act to make its way back into being noticed. Basically, it is for English language learners to be secluded in a classroom with a teacher who is qualified to teach them. However, the SEI classrooms were still heavily in English, and it was expected for students to only stay in there for about a year. However, research began to show that this wasn't the case, deeming it not very successful. So this ballot, passed by voters, didn't really meet all of the needs for English language learners, but it was a good start to mobilizing change again. And also around 2002, No Child Left Behind in 2001 was returned. It returned the positive term for bilingual to, show success rather than deeming English language learners as incapable or really disabled when it comes to learning, when in fact they were kind of just being looked at wrongly, being perceived as just not able, whereas they just weren't guided or given the correct material to be successful. So amongst this No Child Left Behind, you have Title III. This is basically emphasizing language instruction for limited English proficient and immigrant students. It also required state to develop ELP standards and assessments. A few of the ELP standards would be the label for a various amount of levels, about 1 to 5. Basically, a brief description of characteristics on each level that the student is in. Description or describe what students can do in content within each level. And lastly, and importantly, an assessment score that determines the attainment of the level. This organization and regulation just kind of clarifies just different levels and different cases of English language learners, and also a system and a more clear system for them to receive quality education through. Which brings us to this emphasis on language development. And basically in 2014, we have this English language arts and development framework. Language development is incorporated in the instruction of every subject. So during an ESL lesson, math may be the topic, but the top goals for instruction and assessment are language. This overlap provides an opportunity for teachers to collaborate on students' learning progress in order to sustain a consistent quality education for ELL students. The English Learner Roadmap followed in 2017 is very important as it incorporates technology and is an online resource for the 1.4 million English learners in the state of California public schools. Its intention is to supplement standards and inform policy about English learners. It's a historic step by making education for ELL more accessible, and is most important for replacing English only and allowing public schools to teach English learners through a multiple bilingual language program without a waiver. Lastly, following the English Learner Roadmap, later in 2017, Governor Charlie Baker of California signed into law that immersion and the SEI methods were failing many ELL students. Signing and reversing this law of English only, he brings attention to honor the bilingual students with seals of biliteracy for high school diplomas to recognize students proficient in English and another language. As a result, students are building their English language skills at a faster pace. along with parent advisory committees for insight and input. After this 2017 laws, it seems that we will continue to see bilingualism as an asset to global business and being culturally well-rounded, as opposed to, being left behind or left out. So hopefully we can keep moving up.